A good evening and a very warm welcome to the Balie on this Friday evening. Welcome to the program called Frontlines of Democracy, Eastern European Protest. It's very good to see you all here on this Friday evening on this program that the Balie has organized together with the International Foundation GroenLinks. And if you made your way to this room, I think I don't need to tell you that across Eastern Europe, citizens are rising up. In Serbia, Georgia, and far beyond, they are taking to the streets to resist corruption, to fight repression, and to oppose the tightening grip of autocracy. And this evening, together with some remarkable speakers from Georgia, from Serbia, and even the Netherlands, we get to ask ourselves the question, what connects these movements? And most importantly, in this very room, what can we learn from these movements and what connects them? And I think more urgently, we need to ask ourselves the question, what can Europe do to not just stand by, but to actively foster this fight for democracy? My name is Kees Fukema, and I'm a program editor here at the Balie, and I've looked forward to this evening because we have done evenings on the protest in Georgia, we have done evenings on the protest in Serbia, but never have we connected them on stage. I think this is actually a luxury to have you both here. I'll introduce to you shortly, because these uprisings, they offer some lessons we cannot afford to overlook. Lessons about resilience, about citizenship, but I think they also show the Janus face of Europe, one side of the face that speaks very proudly about liberty, and the other side of the face, tolerating its very erosion. So this, I feel, is also at the heart of this evening. Some people don't agree with me. Can Europe live up to the values it so often proclaims? And perhaps also underlining this evening is, can we become as organized, as unshakable, and as coordinated as the autocrats that we oppose? So these questions are what we have to ask ourselves tonight. And before I get to know you a little bit, because I'm wondering what brought you here on this Friday evening, I'm going to introduce you to some people from International Foundation GroenLinks. So here are Gebke and Milka. Please rise, and a good moment to applaud. Yeah. Good moment for applause indeed. Milka Yemane standing here and Gebke van Gaal, both from the International Foundation GroenLinks. And we've taken up the opportunity to organize this evening together. So Milka, I'm just going to ask a simple question. Why tonight?
Well, why tonight? I think you all know that today is also the Dag van Europa, Europe Day. I think I actually, woo, yes, love it. To be really honest, I think there should be more days, of course, to organize these kind of things. And I hope after tonight we will all find that these evenings are important. Because I don't know about you, but lately when I read a newspaper or look at the news or whatsoever, it's sometimes really, really depressing. So tonight, we don't want to only talk about things that go wrong, but we really want to learn from other, well, you will learn about them a little bit later, from other great examples that's happening as well, that we can learn from each other over the borders, and that we can unite together, fighting for the values, what we find very important. So I really hope that tonight will be a night for inspiration and for things that we, you know, when we really want something, that it's okay to fight for it as well. So let's get inspired tonight, yeah.
So that sets the bar for some lessons to be learned. And Gebke, I also wonder if you look at this room, and we talked a little bit about learning lessons, but what responsibility do we have here on this Friday evening? What can we do?
Yeah, that's a big question with a big responsibility, I think. I'm very touched by the fact that there are so many people tonight, because that means that it means something on this day, on Europe Day as well, but also on another day, that we have to sense and really feel what it is to be there in Georgia or in Serbia or in other countries, to stand up for this, this democratic question that we have and that we have to fulfill in our lives. And I think the moment that you sense and hear and feel the emotions of people that will talk about it and be there and grew up there, that it makes a very big difference. We should read, we should look at the television, but it's also important to just connect to each other. And I think it's a big opportunity to have those guests that are talking about all these experiences which we need to also have a warning, but also be there for each other to fight this this together, because I think it's a big responsibility altogether.
So part of the responsibility is to actually share a room and not only connect with each other through phone screens, through television screens, through articles. What's at stake tonight? I'm gonna put it in the middle.
What's at stake? Well, tonight is at stake is that we have a very open-minded conversation. I think there's a lot of room to ask questions. What is at stake is that we saw what happened today in Russia. What is at stake is that
The Victory Day, the other day of Europe, sort of.
yeah, and I just saw a picture of Georgi, who will be in the panel, that at the moment, or maybe an hour ago, a lot of people went on the street in Georgia. So we don't sense that, or well, maybe I don't want to speak for you, but it's here, it's a few hundred meters or 1,000 kilometers away. But it's also, I used to live in Spain, it's about a certain way that you live, that you sense, that you can't explain if you haven't experienced it. And that's a big warning today, that we should be able to have a bit of more of that feeling.
Right. Thank you both. We'll see you at the end. Give them a warm applause. And there is indeed room for questions further on in the end of the evening. But right now, I just want to know what brought you here tonight. So are there any people with specific Georgian origin in the room? All the way over there? Yeah, I'll throw the mic to you at some point. Welcome. Are there any people with specific Serbian origins in the room? Oh, someone who's doubled. Okay, maybe I have to walk that way for sure now. Okay, that is an interesting voice. And I normally don't do this. Would you please pass the microphone if you promise to bring it back at some point?
I'll get the rest of it. Do you want to go first?
And then my question would be, what do you hope for tonight?
Oh, okay. My name is Mariam. I come from Georgia. And yeah, I was informed about tonight from my Serbian friend. And yeah, I was just, every day I keep an eye for the news for Georgia, because before coming here, I grew up there, like in Tbilisi. So yeah, every day my heart is broken to see all the news. So I just want to see how it is portrayed here today on the debate, and how people also look at the issues, and yeah, what's their take?
Yeah, for me, I think it's pretty similar. I also grew up in Belgrade for the majority of my life, but also her and I are both, 23, right? So we're essentially the age of most of the protesters. At least in Serbia, it's quite a student-led protest, so a lot of my friends are actually protesting. And I went to the previous Serbian talk that Balie held, and it was very interesting. So I'm also excited to hear these speakers. And what I hope for, well, I obviously hope it leads to something bigger than just continued protests. So, yeah.
So that sets the bar high for the evening, but also for the audience questions, because you did exactly what we hoped and then brought the microphone back. And this is something that's very rare in the Balie, I can tell you. So without further ado, I will sit down at this table and introduce the speakers of tonight to you. I'm going to ask forward Natalia Stojmonevic and Georgi Pitskiliadze, and give them a warm applause. You can sit either way.
Thank you.
And even with some practice, I'm sure I messed up your names.
Totally.
Totally. So. Yeah, we actually been over this before, and then I messed up anyway. Natalia is a member of the Serbian Parliament, all the way from Serbia here tonight, representing the opposition bloc Zeleno Levi, so Green Left, which is actually GroenLinks in a sense. And she's a prominent advocate for democracy, government transparency, and environmental protection. Three themes that are heavily connected to these protests. And previously, she served as a city councillor in Belgrade and was a key coordinator of the grassroots movement. So I would say a very interesting speaker indeed. You're in parliament and also working together with civil society, so that makes the role ever so interesting. Georgi is a Georgian activist and a former Secretary General of the Cooperation and Development Network Eastern Europe. So Can we say what that is?
Yes. It's basically a network that supports and works with youth organizations with progressive, green, liberal, as you call it, values in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, so actually what tonight is already all about is in there. So you try to work together with these movements all across nation states. And you're currently pursuing a degree in international relations, doing that in the Vienna Central European University.
Indeed.
So took a train to Amsterdam. And you focus on youth mobilization and strengthening democratic values. And when were you last in Georgia?
So I was there during protests. Last time I was there was January actually, this time. So a few months ago, for which I was also invited to the court to go because I had apparently blocked the road, just like thousands of Georgians who are now fined for blocking the road.
And you were part of the protest blocking the road, and the courts found you.
It took them 4 months though.
Yeah.
I got 2 weeks ago for the protest, which was on December 28th.
Okay. I'm just gonna. Okay. Right there, and then it'll work. Yeah, and Natalia, I wanted to start with you today because it is Europe Day, the 9th of May. But Gebke already mentioned it. It's also Victory Day in Moscow, and autocrats, leaders, like-minded figures, they all convened in Moscow today. And Vučić, Alexander Vučić, was also there.
Yeah. This
is not him?
Yeah.
This is Mr. Slovakia?
This is him.
This is him?
Not from today.
Not from today, but this is pretty much the parade that is going on. What do you feel when you see this?
Well, I mean, for the first time in a few years, I can tell that I feel surprised because nobody in Serbia thought that he will dare to go. Since the challenges that he is facing inside the country, but also because for the first time in a few years, we heard some clear signs from European Union that cannot be tolerated anymore on that level that he is doing.
What were those signs?
Sorry?
What were those clear signs from the European Union?
So that Serbia really needs to show that she's going through as we have in our strategies and in our constitution toward the European Union, that this behavior where we still don't have sanctions toward Russia is not tolerable. Mm-hmm. So far it has been. And there are different reasons, I believe, for that. So we can discuss it in the evening. But I think this is the essentially how the autocratic regimes see the Europe today. Apart from I'm one of representatives of the opposition parties in Serbia. As we see Europe as something that it's not only interest, but also holds up some values that the students are protesting for that for a month now in Serbia. So, but also we want to be recognized in Europe as a partner who will bring the value. Mm-hmm. And also someone who will also decide and have a decision-making power, because usually, I said that a few times through the conversation during the few days that I was here. In one moment, it was really hard to be pro-European in Serbia.
Why?
Well, mostly when it comes, I don't know if you're familiar with the lithium and critical raw material question in Serbia. So
it's about the Rio Tinto, the lithium mining.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we felt that the some interest that were more important to Europe than the people in Serbia, the local community can decide what they want to do with that. But
so the European Union had a big interest in these critical earth
mostly
metals?
Germany.
Mostly
yeah,
Germany.
Mostly Germany. But I must say that from some officials in European Union, we heard the positive messages in past few days. But what was really important for us as a Green Left Front, as that we showed through the EGP, who supported us in that way and showed that Europe is not only one-way street, only one opinion, that there is a different voices that that are valuing different aspects of that union. So that was really important for us. But in the citizens of Serbia, I think in one moment felt like they are being used and
used by the European Union in this case.
I mean, used in the way that not specifically European Union, but somehow that somebody is ready to close, to have eyes wide closed in front of something in order of other things. So we are really happy that in past few days we can see that that is changing. I never think that it's too late, but also I think that we didn't give up on Europe. You can see students that are bicycling and running in Strasbourg, so they didn't give up. So I think we are not as well. And I think that this vision of Europe, apart from this, that is now in Moscow, will win one day.
Yeah. So a couple of surprises. One is that that Vučić actually went to Moscow, even though that would have been a sort of crossing the Rubicon, so to speak, and also that the European Union has slowly started to recognize what the Serbian citizens and the Serbian students are fighting for.
I mean, I think that European Union recognized that long ago, since if I will say this in a more, so I will mention some documents, so if it's important for the context. So Serbia, as a part of enlargement process, adopted the reform agenda, growth plan. In all of those documents, Serbia said we will comply with standards of EU, especially when it comes to public procurement, because I believe we will talk a little bit more about Novi Sad later. But the corruption that is shaping literally every public interaction in the institution it captured the state. So we are talking about the captured state. So,
a very corrupt state, in that sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, yeah. That will be the diagnosis.
That would be the diagnosis.
Yeah. So in that terms, I think that it's really important to understand that EU standards are something that can break out the current regime in Serbia, because Europe is asking to comply with those standards, and she's asking that for a long time. She is saying in various reports, okay, so you adopted a few laws, but you never implemented any of them. But I think that the pressure of Europe so far hasn't been so much, because I think they appreciated every step toward the EU that Serbia made. They had understanding, but I hope that now the realization is that Serbia cannot have any determined and full step until we solve what is happening now.
Exactly. Before we move to Georgia and talk about what triggers the protests over there and what connects the movements later on, you mentioned Novi Sad already, the collapse of a train station canopy that ended up taking the lives of 16 people.
Exactly.
A corrupt buildings story. How did that become the trigger of this huge, massive protest movement that we're seeing now, the biggest in the history of Serbia, probably?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know that when you're dealing with elected autocratic regime, as we are dealing in Serbia, you somehow think that every such, I would call it a mistake by the government, because they are viewing that in that way, will capsulate and be capsulate the change. But what I learned from 2014, because we started as someone who was opposed against Belgrade on water, the project, when literally, and I want, that is important because that is the night when state pulled out the police, demolished one neighborhood, and nobody ever held responsible for that. And when you ask about that night that led to a death of one person who had a heart attack because he was in cuffs by people who wear bandana,
Masks.
masks,
Yeah.
mask, thank you. When you ask about that, the officials in Serbia, the president itself, will say, the only difference that I will do that by the day. That was on election night in 2016.
On the night of the election?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
literally one group that was supported by the government demolished the legal state for a few hours in the center of Belgrade. So I think all started then. So none of these events are surprising. It's always surprising how inhumane answer you get from the authorities toward the mistakes that they held. So I'm sure that you're also familiar that in 2023 we had a massive protest, Serbia against violence, because we had mass murders in the schools. In one school and in one suburb of Belgrade, in Mladenovac. Also, a lot of children were killed then. So the point I'm trying to make. So you think that each of these events that show you that simply that infrastructure that is serving to a few people will basically collapse on our lives.
On all the lives of citizens.
Of a way. You always think, okay, this, we cannot stay silent on this. But what I learned in these 10 years, that you cannot foresee a change. But what I think is important, and it's important always to remember, and I hope that to my Serbian fellows here I will give some hope, is that you need to be ready when the change comes, and that you need to be ready in a way that you know what change you want and not to accept everything.
So you be ready for the very thing that then suddenly triggers
Exactly.
the movement of citizens.
Exactly.
And that trigger ended up being the Novi Sad train station.
I would say that we had a lot of triggers in the past few years.
Enough triggers.
So, yeah, we had a massive protest in 2023. Literally, I know since I became a city councillor, it's a year after year where I'm standing in front of something in a minute of silence for some people that were basically killed by this government.
Exactly.
So, but what is the difference this time? That, the general feeling in Serbia is, okay, young people, they are not so involved, they are not so bright. Usually they will see you as a young people in Serbia as someone who needs to be patronized. So, mother will tell you what is the best for you, what faculty for you to go, but people are strange why young people are not involving in the society, but they're expecting to follow all the leads by the adults. So the change is that this time, the young people literally went to every spot of the Serbia.
Exactly.
And some parts of the Serbia I come from Vranje. I live in Belgrade for 14 years.
Where is Vranje?
Vranje is the city on the south of Serbia, close to the border, to North Macedonia. So some villages, I never didn't see a young people that represent some sort of a life of future in those parts for years. Now they're seeing it, and I can blame opposition also partially on that, because I think we are responsible that we didn't do that in a timely manner. But also the other thing that it helped, that autonomous universities are important. That autonomy of university is important, because that is the only part where we managed to preserve autonomy, managed to preserve democracy,
and preserve these values.
Change started from there.
Yeah. And these students actually ended up going to 200 different
Students,
cities all over.
professors as well, because
Amazing.
students started with the blockade, but we had the strike that was going on in our high schools and elementary schools, and you can see from various examples from those professors in high schools and elementary schools, from professors of university, that were the places where people with some values that they are demanding now are nurtured.
Yeah,
So-
that's where these values
Yeah.
were being safeguarded, and then
So I think it's
when they were
important
ready,
to think about the structures where we have autonomy and democracy, because that will produce that kind of citizens.
Georgi, would you agree with that last statement about that these students' bodies, the universities, autonomous universities, that's where these values are actually being safeguarded?
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. Also in Georgia, universities and students played a crucial role in mobilizing and going out in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we do see the very worrisome trend in Georgia, in Serbia as well, but actually in the places where we would never think that it would be happening, in the United States of America, of an attack on freedom of universities and its own autonomies. I think one of the key takeaways from this discussion in the end has to be that democracy cannot be taken for granted.
Nowhere.
And it will be assaulted by those who would love to have power forever, to get themselves rich on the expense of the majorities of the people. So in Georgia as well, this was crucial part, student mobilization, being in the streets, and as soon as the decision was announced, and maybe we can talk about how the current protest, which is going on for over 150 days, every single evening, Main
Even
Avenue.
tonight.
Even tonight. Tonight is actually a very big day. Because it's Europe Day, it was announced a bigger demonstration, and right now, even still now, should be thousands and tens of thousands of people in the streets of capital gathering to celebrate Europe Day, but also remind themselves that even though not every single day you can have so many people in the streets, the protest is going on. It didn't weaken, didn't wave. That people are ready to continue fighting for democracy and for living in a better future, which we see is only possible on this continent in Europe.
Yeah. And how is it possible that these protests in Georgia reached this scale? If it came from young people, from students, I mean, these were containments of those values for sure, but these protests are now massive and shared by a huge part of the citizenry.
That is very true. Just like Natalia mentioned, these are not singular events in a way. It would be very difficult for me to say, okay, this is the date when everything started, because whenever I say one date, you have a date before that on which actually things were started, and even before that, we go very deep.
There's no single trigger.
Exactly. There was one massive trigger. The latest one is on 28th of November. I would say so-called Prime Minister of Georgia announced that Georgia would be halting accession towards the European Union. Kobachidze, indeed. And before that, on 26th of October, we actually had a general elections, which is disputed. It was likely rigged, but government announced that they won elections with over 54%. So for a month already, there was a demonstrations going on, although their scale was not as big as that of after the end of November. So there was already boiling the situation very much. And then as soon as there was this briefing press conference by a so-called Prime Minister, we had, on the same evening, we had Tbilisi and all major cities actually all around the country, which is very rare in Georgia. You had people flooding the streets with anger that we have been fighting for this for 30 years. Russia invaded Georgia in 2008 because Georgia was going towards the European Union and towards Europe. We were fighting against the Soviets in the late 80s when we were wanting Georgia's independence, because we thought Georgia to be going to Europe, and this not just a geographical place, but as a place of these values that we believe in, which is democracy, which is human rights, which is equality and welfare. And without which, of course, we cannot go there. And our prime minister saying that openly by himself, who recently announced that he won elections, that was really slap in the face of Georgian society, and that's why the people flooded the streets. And it really was intergenerational. I say the students were a leading force, but it really was intergenerational. Even now, when I was there, for example, a few months ago in the streets, you see people of all ages, of all backgrounds, because there are very few things that usually unite societies. We love to highlight our differences. We have all the different opinions, different parties, different viewpoints, different readings of history, but there's always something that really unifies the entire society. And for Georgia's case, this has really been our deep desire to be part of Europe as a place of safety also. And because of that, people got really angry that how dare you just throw all the costs that we really paid as a nation, economic with human lives, like people were killed because of that, just throw away in the trash bin on a one press conference and say, sorry, but we are stopping accession towards the EU. That really, really angered people, and it still continues to be. That's how thousands of people every single evening for over 150 days are protesting.
Yeah. So those values are contained, maybe safeguarded, but also shared very widely. And when triggered, there was suddenly a very wide and shared urge to go onto the streets, flooding the streets.
Yeah, definitely. Not every single evening you have massive crowds, obviously, even though in the first 20 days, you actually had not one of the largest, but largest demonstrations in Georgian history. I think this was very similar in Serbia, where there was 300,000, even more, people in the streets of Belgrade and also all around Serbia. We had similar numbers, unbelievable amount of people in the streets. Truly, the entire city went to the streets. But of course, it cannot happen every evening.
No.
But whenever there's a realization that, okay, today is an important day, like today is Europe Day, it's very important for us. You have way more people going out in the streets. And government really wants, and that was their strategy in the beginning, really learning from the playbook of Putin. Yeah.
And actually, I'm learning from the playbook of Putin, but also the playbooks of the shared strategies by Serbian and Georgian protesters. Because before 2000, before Milosevic, there was Otpor in Serbia. Exactly. And they apparently trained people from Kamara.
Yes, indeed.
So what are the strategies that we see both in Georgia and Serbia at the same time? Are these similar movements? I can definitely see some differences, but what are the shared strategies?
Well, in terms of tactics, for sure, that is a citizen disobedience. So various methods that are. So we now, as Georgia, have a long tradition of those methods, and we perfected them, I would say, since I think that we had 8 years together that we didn't have any massive protest in both countries. So that is apparently a way of living. What I think it's similar, it's the values that people are fighting in both countries are pretty much similar. I hope that also one thing will be similar because I think, and we shared a lot of thoughts during these 2 days, that somehow the citizens both in Serbia and Georgia expect that okay, we are fighting for democracy, and that democracy will be achieved at the moment we overthrow the regime. So, if we overthrow him now, that tomorrow we will have a democracy. I think that it's important that similarity for us be that democracy is not a simple goal that we will achieve and we will say that's it. that a democracy is actually a form of a living that you need to preserve, to nurture, and that we will have some sort also of ideological and all different fight after that, what kind of democracy we want. And I know that for the both countries that is a hell of a job, but I think that we learned that every other option is a hell of a living. So
it's hell of a fight, but the other one is hell of a living.
I will not say that it's a hell of a fight, because I think that somehow we started to enjoying the fight.
Enjoying it.
We are fighting like for 13 years. You need to have some sort of a joy that to be active citizens in order not to go mad. I think that the biggest difference is actually how Europe see the protests in Serbia and Georgia.
And do you want to add something?
Definitely. I mean, I spent almost 3 years in Belgrade, actually, right before moving to Vienna. So when I saw the reaction of the European Union ambassadors back in 2 years ago, when there was the first big clashes in the streets of Tbilisi, when Georgian government announced foreign agents law. I hope you're familiar with it. It's a fantastic playbook for autocrats to completely discredit NGOs.
We also had the
it's all over the place.
It's all over the place. You have Hungary, Slovakia, Russia, of course. Russia started actually. So we had massive demonstrations on that. And on that day, European Union, also USA, was as clear as diplomats can be. Actually more clear than diplomats can be. They wrote, made these common statements. If you adopt this law, if you adopt Russian law, that was super important framing way. If you adopt Russian law, forget about the European Union. There was nothing.
What does it tell you?
It tells me that European Union was more ready to talk about Georgia, because it realized that first it also has a leverage in a way on a Georgian society, and then interest of democracy might be more important for them than something else in Georgia. But in Serbia, things are more complicated in that way, and hopefully it is changing now. We saw statements from the Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos, quite positive, I would say, that they're realizing that you cannot have stability, because there's this whole term called stabilocracy, that you would rather have stability than democracy in its neighborhood.
Yeah.
Bullshit. It cannot happen, because non-democracies are everything but stability. So I think they are coming to realize that. But when Serbian protests were happening, most of the leaders of the European Union in the capitals, or also as institutions in Brussels, except the European Parliament, that has to be mentioned. Parliament has
because there's a parliamentarian going to join us at the table.
Yes.
You're too kind.
But Parliament has always been the most vocal institution in the European Union when it comes to defending democracies and recognizing even earlier the dangerous trajectories these countries were going.
And would you go as far as to say that the European Union was hypocritical in its reaction?
I would say yes. Yeah. I hope it's changing now, and I think we are seeing some of these. There is hypocrisy in the European Union to many of the things which is going around us. And this is something that I think one more takeaway from this, that we need European consistency. Because one of the selling points the Georgian Dream, and similarly Vučić has, is that, okay, they're citizens, we might have problems today, maybe even tomorrow, but look at the European Union going into Baku and shaking hands with the dictator Aliyev, who doesn't even hide that he's a dictator, because they have a gas deal. So they're going to come to us anyways, because we have lithium, or we have a middle corridor in Georgia. And these kind of signs are really weakening the European Union, because, of course, we need to be pragmatic, obviously. Cannot survive without that, but that has to be consistent. But you cannot claim that you are supporting democracy in one place and in another place make a statement not even highlighting the complete lack of democracy and abuse of human rights.
So shaking hands with Aliyev is actually shaking the very foundation of what the union should be.
Yeah, possibly, and this is not only about Aliyev, but we can think of way more countries and where you make deal also. Yeah.
Natalia?
Is the same question. Yeah.
It is sort of is European listening? Is the fact that Europe is listening to the both of you, is it vital? Is it hypocritical? What?
No, it's definitely listening. The listening part, it's not the problem. I think that is one of the things that it's a value in Europe. So it will listen all the sides. What I think it's lacking is some sort of explanation. What is the difference between one citizens fighting for freedom from the other?
Yeah.
So in that terms, I also think that the enlargement process is something that is important for Europe, and I personally think that can strengthen the Union and can really expand and include what Europe needs at this moment, and that is to feel more united, because it is a large force that acts on this continent. So I think that it's important that enlargement process is not taken for granted in some way. But I also understand that also the European Union has the boundaries where the interference in the internal questions of some countries actually jeopardizing the activation of the citizens and their own decision-making process. But
some interference is actually inhibiting exchange. I think what is actually important is to see that Europe recognize who she is working with. Yeah. Yeah.
And regarding Vučić, we actually had that a few days ago and I agree with this on European Parliament, because in European Parliament we also had a resolution about the elections in 2024 that was rigged in Serbia, and that is important for accession process and basically for Europe, because that is one of the core values. So in that terms, I think that if Europe recognizes one side, that is for surely Vučić, I think that it's a really good step that in past few days we see the discussion in European Parliament, we see some clear statements that she also recognizes on the other side.
Yeah. And speaking of working from both within and outside of Europe and being both a citizen and a politician, I wanted to show some footage of what you were doing in the in the Serbian parliament.
I think it's a city council.
In the city council of Belgrade.
The same thing. I was painting.
If the technicians know what I'm talking about.
I was painting. Yeah.
You were painting the city council.
Yeah, exactly. These are the chairs where the presidents of the city assembly, who is the president for 14 years, is sitting now, and. I didn't sign up to be an MP who participated in the assembly that we throw smoke bombs on the ministers. I didn't sign up to do this. What we experienced and what is the average life of oppositional Serbian politician. So we usually have one car in front of our buildings for people who are tracking us. Most of our phones were listened in some way. We have now 12 activists in prison because the room of the political party was wiretapped, and they used that in order to capture them, to raise charges against them. And what I think, this is the obvious reasons that somehow you accept when you decide to do this in your life. I must say that I wasn't bluntly aware that this was going to happen. I have now 30 years. When I started, I had 26, and I had a little different visions of parliamentarian work. But for the 13 years, there wasn't one proposition, one amendment on the law that was accepted by the ruling majority from the opposition.
Not a single one.
Not a single one. What they will do, they will take the proposal that you drafted and they will make it as theirs. And then they will adopt it. And we will be happy because then we thought citizens will actually get something.
Yeah.
But imagine for you to go to work every day and to be totally ignored by some by
as an elected official. Even.
And I didn't get there by stealing votes. I didn't get there by blackmailing somebody. I get there because actually some people elected us. So the Serbian Progressive Party, and we acknowledge that I want to say we needed the years to somehow see this trauma, but they made you feel like you don't deserve to be there, like you don't have what to offer, and they put you in that basket that you're the same politician as they are. Mm-hmm. So I think that is, so that this was the performance that after that we asked for the city assembly to stop some public-private partnerships that were obviously corrupted, because they will have a public procurement for one company who which was crazy, that not to waste time, but this was something that I felt that I can do. To show what I think, what the people who elected me think of that, because every other way of conversation, of dialogue, of the debate was simply shut down and was not an option. So I mean, I sit next. There sits the mayor. The mayor calls me the girl, a little girl, kid from the Vranje. I have 30 years, and he calls me like a little girl in order to make me as someone who is what usually in Serbian conservative societies, that you're the woman who doesn't have children and raising a family, but you're a politician. So yeah, my point is we didn't sign up for this, but sometimes you don't have any other option.
And I think that is a very good illustration of one very big difference between some sort of middle-way democracy, which is now actually turning into autocracy, and the more established democracies, where in our countries, both in Georgia and Serbia, but all across Eastern Europe, the institutions are really just a facade. If in democracies you have institutions where you have separation of power, obviously the basics of democracy, and within the institutions you have a possibility to actually have an influence over the decision making. Typically, for example, you have one party in the government, and then you have different party who's chairing the committee on some different issues, and then you really have some sort of negotiations, and you have things actually work and are get done. There is, of course, many problems, but and in Eastern Europe, they're everything but working institutions. They are purposely completely eroded. They just facilitate this pure, uncontrolled power that the people in charge actually have, and it's usually just one guy or a few oligarchs who control.
It's a theatrical facade.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Yes, indeed. There is no moment at which they're gonna accept any amendment from the opposition, because their entire power depends on them saying we control everything.
Except to deliver some insults, perhaps. Yeah.
They're good at that. Yeah.
Sorry, it's not only a theatrical facade. It's full of people who will say you by the end of the day, I was doing my job.
Exactly. Okay. And they will say that. I'm gonna allow this conversation to be interrupted slightly, but you'll stay here, luckily, and then we'll broaden the floor and invite some more speakers to the fore. But first I want to shift our vision a bit towards history. We did mention this already, how these protests are not part of one trigger, but part of a big history. And I think someone who is very good at showing how sometimes we are a bit trapped in history, and how especially autocrats can use history to instrumentalize their own vision forward. So to talk about Europe Day versus Victory Day is a very good example. So I'm going to introduce Ivo van Wijdeven to you, and then afterwards you can give him a warm hand of applause, who is a Dutch historian, a political analyst, and former senior advisor to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. Many years of experience in The Hague, but now providing context in Europe to radio, television programs and journalistic outputs alike. And the author of several books, one that's right in front of me, De Rafelranden van Europa, which I'm going to translate to the frayed edges of Europe. I don't know what the English market is officially given the title to. But another book, Power of the Past, which I think is super topical because it's about autocratic leaders like Putin, like Vucic, who use history as a political tool. A sort of a nostalgic nationalism that seeks to dominate all politics. We've asked Ivo to talk about the values of Europe and to give us an interruption. So please give him a warm hand of applause.
All right, the winds of change. Now that the world seems to be permanently on fire, I sometimes look back nostalgically at my younger years in the hopeful 1990s. I'm that old. The Berlin Wall had fallen, the Iron Curtain had been torn down, border posts made way for the free movement of people, currency exchange offices for a common currency. The former Eastern Bloc was welcomed with almost open arms. Decades of division disappeared. Europe had settled its troubled past. The EasyJet generation soared into the future. I myself traveled the length and width of Europe by train and was amazed by its diversity and culture. The winds of change blew through Europe as the German rock band The Scorpions sang about the revolutions in Eastern Europe in the miraculous year 1989. Of course, not everything was peace and harmony. The EU watched helplessly as Yugoslavia disintegrated, and on the fringes of Europe, tensions remained. But member states of the European Union seem to be heading toward a bright future. Freedom, whether individual or collective, and the rule of law were held in high regard. The Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the EU on the grounds that the organization had advanced peace, reconciliation, democracy, and human rights in Europe. Furthermore, the EU had promoted friendly relations between the former arch-enemies Germany and France. Today, people in Georgia, Serbia, and most notably Ukraine are fighting for that European ideal. They also hope for a better future and see the EU as a shining example, or better yet, the best way to achieve that future. But paradoxically, the European ideal resonates loudest today in countries that are not members of the EU. The liberal Europe that the children of tomorrow dream of seems to be gradually becoming a thing of the past. Illiberalism is gaining ground. The winds of change are here, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban jubilantly declared on X after Geert Wilders' election victory in November 2023. Wilders' victory, according to Orban, was merely the start of a triumph for the ultra-conservative camp. It was time to saddle up and don the armor for the electoral battlefield. A new revolution loomed on the horizon. For the EU's notorious obstructionist, leaving Brussels is no longer the goal. Not a single strand of Orban's hair contemplates a Hexit, as Hungary cannot function without the EU's billions. No, Orban intends to take over Brussels. He is not necessarily anti-Europe, but strives for a different Europe. Anti-woke, anti-gender, anti-migration, anti-Brussels, and, of course, anti-liberal. The same goes for his ideological compatriots in other member states as Slovakia, Romania, Germany, France, and the Netherlands. People like Robert Fico, George Simeon, Alice Weidel, Marine Le Pen, and Geert Wilders share Viktor Orban's ideas. Orban leads the anti-liberal offensive. Europe's longest-serving leader positions himself as the defender of true European Christian civilization, which he claims is being demolished by the progressive liberal elite. To achieve his vision of a different Europe, Orbán dreamt of forming a grand coalition in the European Parliament, including his party Fidesz, the European Conservative and Reformists, the far-right Identity and Democracy, and, begrudgingly, the Christian Democratic EPP. These sovereigntists, as Orbán calls them, would once again prioritize the nation-state. Make Europe great again is his motto. But, fortunately, Orbán's dream coalition never materialized. Although Eurosceptics did gain seats in the 2024 European election, the Christian Democrats, Social Democrats and Liberals were still able to form a centrist coalition. The Hungarian presidency fizzled out quietly last December. Orbán wasn't able to leave his mark on the European Union. Or did he? The European Commission has seen the writing on the electoral wall. It has quietly changed course in the last months. Rules and regulations have been altered. The environmental ambitions of the Green Deal have been scaled down to support faltering industries, lower energy bills, and placate angry farmers. In the current geopolitical climate, European cooperation is indispensable. The European Commission simply cannot afford that Orbán and his ideological allies will throw a wrench in the wheel, even if this means toning down hallowed European ideals. Furthermore, the return of Donald Trump to the White House has given illiberal politicians the world over an enormous boost in morale. The EU, meanwhile, is turning inward. Fortress Europe will only protect the people already inside. A new divide is appearing in Europe between the people that are in and the people that are out. Meanwhile, on the inside, the citizens of the EU are taking its achievements for granted. It doesn't help that the EU's biggest successes are invisible. No limits on personal freedom, no borders within, and no war within its borders. People seem to have forgotten how Europe looked before 1989, or before 1945 for that matter. Or they just don't care. In any case, they feel free to experiment with the ballot box, because what's the worst that could happen? The EU is indifferent, both its leadership and its citizens. And therein lies the danger. Illiberal decay and democratic backsliding will worsen, not only within the EU, but also outside the thick walls of the fortress, as it no longer serves as a shining example. This begs the question, why would you even aspire to become a member of this European Union? Meanwhile, Orbán remains unbothered, comfortably settled in his palace in Budapest. The ordinary European will bear the brunt. But, especially in these trying times, the European Union should rise to the challenge and show the world that there is indeed an alternative to what Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin preach. Europe could easily take America's place as a shining city upon a hill if it only wanted to. What's more, it's a moral obligation to do so when people are dying in the trenches in Ukraine and being beat up in the streets of Tbilisi defending the European ideal. Also, Brussels should take a close look at its own rulebook and firmly call Orbán and his allies to account. And what if they don't listen? Hit them where it hurts, in their wallets. Previous experiences have shown Orbán to be very susceptible to financial encouragement. And perhaps Brussels should pay more attention to what is happening in Tbilisi and Belgrade, because, fortunately, the protests in Georgia and Serbia show the winds of change can always change direction once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivan van der Wijdeven, for that wonderful interruption. I'm also going to ask Tineke Strik to come to the fore. Give her a warm hand. Thank you so much. Tineke Strik, member of the European Parliament for the Dutch Greens, and sits in the Committee of Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs in Brussels. A strong advocate for migration policy, so the in and out.
Good migration policy.
Good migration policy. That's a fair interruption. And the protection of the rule of law and the strengthening of democratic institutions across and beyond the EU. And I think very relevant to tonight, she has also been particularly active in addressing the democratic backsliding in Hungary as a rapporteur for the Article 7 procedure against Hungary, leading the efforts to assess the Hungarian government's breaches of, well, the EU values that we have been speaking of, but including media freedom, the rights of minorities, judicial independence, rule of law instruments, and putting that high on the agenda of the EU. So welcome, Tineke, welcome, Ivo. There's a lot to take from the first conversation. There's also a lot of things to take from Ivo's column. But one thing that I've heard that I might want to ask you is that I've heard Ivo say, paradoxically, the European ideal sounds loudest today in the countries that are not members.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Well, I hear them, and also EU member states where rule of law is backsliding. I mean, I hear many people in Hungary crying for more democracy, and also other backsliding countries. But yeah, to a certain extent, he's fully right. I mean, those countries who we say we want to take them on board, we want to share our democracy and values with them, are crying for help in order to get these, to enjoy these freedoms and democracy. And then we need to be there, of course. We need to also show that we are credible and we are delivering towards them. I find it interesting that you also said that the EU seems to go inward and be only for the people inside the EU and not outside anymore. And I'm sure we all remember once Russia invaded Ukraine, it was a huge push for the EU to say, now we need to welcome all our neighboring countries. We should make sure that they share.
Look outward. Yeah.
Yes, look outward. And indeed, all of a sudden, it's only a few years ago, you seem to see another direction. And also that moment, I think, it was a kind of wake-up call for many people. Like, on the one hand, indeed, we need to take the enlargement and the accession much more seriously. Mm-hmm. But also, what also von der Leyen and many people were saying, this is about autocracy against democracy. And people in Ukraine are fighting for our freedoms. It was very genuinely meant, I think. But if you look further, I really wonder now often, okay, we're talking about more defense, rearming and whatever, but what are we defending then? Are we still seeing that it is about our values? Indeed, what you say, what is the difference between us, Russia and Trump?
And why would you even aspire to become
exactly.
It's the hypocrisy that got mentioned in the first part of the evening. At first we were like defending Ukraine because the Ukrainians were defending our values. Yeah. And now we seem to have grown a bit tired of that fight. It costs us a lot. It means we have to pick up the fight as well and get ourselves organized. And we seem to be afraid of that and taking the easy way of just shutting the door and saying, well, we'll defend ourselves. And I'm really sad about that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and does that mean in a way that if we talk about not looking outward, that stark difference between autocracy versus democracy is no longer felt? Does that mean that these Orban-minded Europeans, that they are gaining ground, like Ivo concluded?
Yeah, I think
this idea of Europe is actually
it's true. I mean, and this line between autocracy and democracy has become very blurry, actually. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, because also inside the EU, as you mentioned, Orban already, but the others as well, we have the enemy within as well. It's not like black and white inside or outside. And this is also maybe one of the problems for the neighboring countries where the protest movements are so vocal, because we are divided completely as an EU. Yeah. So we are not these strongholds towards these values anymore.
So in a sense, history, or at least the optimistic reader of history, would have assumed that a country like Serbia would slowly move towards, for example, a Dutch or a Scandinavian model of democracy with strong institutions. But now we see that actually those countries are being inspired by having shady institutions, by having very vague rule of law, having very maybe very weak judicial independence.
Yeah, and in that sense, it was already mentioned by Natalia and Georgie, this impunity of the autocratic leaders inside the EU is a big source of inspiration, of course, because apparently you can get away with this, with the foreign agent law, with capturing judiciary, with total control on the media, because if Orban can do it...
Getting rid of media altogether.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if we realize well enough what the impact is of letting this grow, this autocracy inside the EU. You already talked about the lack of credibility, also with what we are doing in our external policy, and I fully agree with that. But this one is also one of them, I think, that we, what can we ask from Fujic, from Georgian Dreamer, whatever, if we show on a daily basis that actually
we tolerate
don't
intolerance
care that much.
And I think it's all due to an error in the fabric of the EU. I mean, we have a big accession process which does hold countries to account, and people have to jump through a lot of hoops to get into the EU. But once you're in, suddenly we don't care a lot anymore. We seem to be like, oh yeah, we don't have any rules. We do now with the rule of law criterion, but we didn't have any rules apart from Article 7, which is really, really hard to...
It's a stark rule.
Yeah, it's a stark rule, but it's also a really powerless rule because it's bound to be vetoed by other autocratic leaders once you start a procedure. But we don't have any way to hold our own democracy safe.
Why did we make this mistake, this fabric mistake?
Well, we didn't expect democratic backsliding. We expected it to be a way forward. Like you said, if once countries joined the EU, we would expect them to stick to the rule book, and they jumped to the hoops, and now it's safe. Democracy is safe. We don't have to do anything about it anymore.
It was the end of the history, no? This is the end.
Yeah. There's only one way.
I'm actually counting the amount of people that cite Fukuyama in this last year and say, the end of history, it's the end of history, and then it happens every night, luckily now enough.
Yeah, it's not like that you believed in the project in the first, but sometimes you have a feeling that also the Europe, for example, thinks that Vučić will change.
Yeah.
So that believing is somehow surviving.
But I would also say I agree. In the beginning, or for a long time, we didn't have a toolbox at all in order to get these countries back on track. But even now we have a full toolbox. We really have a lot. We have the possibility to freeze the funding.
For example? Freeze the funding?
Yeah, we can sue them at the Court of Justice and give them a lot of fines in the end. We can take away their voting rights, but there is not enough political will and not enough sense of urgency that we need to do it to save our democracies and our values.
And does it help that, for example, someone like Vučić can make deals about the Belt and Road Initiative with Xi Jinping on the one hand, but also have a lithium deal with the EU on the other? Is this something?
Well, indeed, actually, what you also concluded, there are always other interests that prevail. And I think with Orban, because that's the point, Orban is already 15 years in power, and he managed to completely destroy the system for let's say 10 years, and only afterwards then things started, because Orban, the Fidesz party, was part of the EPP party, which was the biggest party. So they didn't want to fuss with Orban. You have this interest, indeed, of economic interest. Now lithium, but also before, you had Germany having a lot of economic relations with Serbia. And for instance, Orban, also economic interest in Hungary, but you also see the same pattern with neighboring countries. And van der Leyen was also chosen because of the support of Orban. These
needed Orban back in those days for the migration deal.
Also on migration. So and there you see this pattern everywhere. That we are vocal on the values, but if it comes to really acting, we always let other interests prevail.
That's that Janus face in the beginning of the evening. So that how, and this is speaking to you also from a parliament perspective, history perspective, and from from an activist standpoint, what allows the European Union to be so two-faced? How can we not stick to our own rule book? How can we tolerate our own intolerance in that sense? How is it possible?
I think many of us still underestimate the impact of it, because I still think the EU is built on values, and if we don't have them anymore, if we don't value them anymore, we might end up in indeed also, what is the difference actually between the autocracies that we see in other parts of the world? We would lose the freedoms that we say we are fighting for. And then it's even more difficult to get them back. And I'm quite surprised that even now you see that Orban is not only, destroying rule of law, with also an impact on the other countries, but he's also a big security risk for the EU as a whole.
And today was some big news concerning the Orban led or Hungary-led spy operation in the Ukraine.
Exactly. And he's now expelled diplomats from Ukraine out of his country. Never did so for the Russian diplomats. So it's very clear where he stands.
So he's actually opening the door to the possibility of becoming part of that war. Orban.
Yeah, definitely. Although before he was always the dove of peace, and he didn't.
Buffer between.
We never believed in it, but indeed now he's even more revealing his own active interest in this war, in waging this war, and he's inside of us
with a membership above his head.
Yes, exactly, and he is always playing with not supporting the sanctions on Putin. If he will do so in July, it will mean that all the assets that are frozen, that are in the EU, will become unfrozen and go back to Russia. He is obstructing the support for Ukraine. So he's a real security danger, and yet member states are not sufficiently motivated to use Article 7, where they can take away that veto. And that still puzzles me, actually.
It does. I mean, Orban is like an enormous opportunist. He is very opportunistic, and he's just playing both sides. He's going to Putin and says, well, I might buy a nuclear reactor from you, or I might buy gas, but I also have the European Union, so could you do me a good price? And then he gets the price, and then he goes to the European Union and says, I might support your standpoints on Ukraine, but you have some frozen funding for me, and I would really love to have the funding. And the European Union caves in, and but we really should be firm and not hypocritical, and stick to our guns on this and not allow him to play those games. But unfortunately, there are bigger issues at stake. We see him as a security risk and say, well, no, we don't want him to destroy the unity of the European Union, so better give him the money, even though he plays both sides.
He's already doing it, and he's using it not only to block, but also to blackmail, so that he can still get his money. So that should really be broken, and that requires apparently a lot of courage. What member states at the moment are lacking.
Yeah, and I mean, Tineke, we know your arena for this debate is the European Parliament.
Yeah.
You can see this unwillingness of member states firsthand.
Yeah.
So maybe you can help us see why that unwillingness is so persistent.
Yeah.
But also, do you feel that if we look at the conversation that we had tonight, there's this big ingredient missing out of the debate, which is called civil society?
Yeah.
A total loud emptiness of sound coming from civil society on this subject.
In the EU, you mean?
Within the EU, or the Netherlands, if you want to make it more specific.
Yeah.
Why can Orban run around waving the European flag over its head, making these deals?
Yeah, go ahead.
I fear it's because if you go to Hungary, people are demonstrating in the streets, and people are protesting against what he is doing over there. But the people here in the Netherlands, they don't really seem to care. Or a majority of the people, I think people in this specific room are caring about
No,
it.
we're not sure.
We're not sure. We're going to ask them later, maybe. But in general, the Dutch general public doesn't really care what's happening in Hungary. They fear the security issues. They want to Orban to step in line and be a secure partner for Europe, defending our wealth. But further than that, we don't really care about the Hungarians. We don't know them too well. We don't care about them. And that's a really big problem. We don't know each other well enough inside of Europe, I fear.
And
yeah, maybe the first question, why? Why is that the case? I think in the Council, member states have had since the beginning until now a quite of non-interventionist approach. They're not addressing each other's shortcomings or whatever, because that could backfire. It's something like this. And now I'm doing a round along all the embassies to push them to do something on Article 7. And then I hear all kinds of excuses like, yeah, but we are a neighboring country of Hungary, so that might be, you know, that might be dangerous. And there is an internal protest now. Maybe we jeopardize it if we do something externally. And so there's still not a lot of appetite. Germany has some strong words in its coalition agreement. So I'm pushing them to also become a front runner, because someone should take the lead. It doesn't come naturally. That's very clear. And in that sense, I think this is really the weak and the blind spot, citizens engaging with citizens. Yes. Because once people really realize this could also happen to us, and we are in the same boat, actually, then maybe there could be also a push towards the governments in the member states, saying, look, you have to do more for the citizens, not only within the EU, but also in the neighboring countries that aspire to become member. And in that sense, I think citizens' movements working together, it's really gold. This is what you need.
And Georgia, you've been Secretary General to, well, a movement that tries to connect all these youth movements. There's also a book right in front of me that's called Autocracy Incorporated by Anne Applebaum, who has, well, mapped how autocrats across the world, autocrats outside of Europe, but also in Europe, and we're talking about Orban here, are working together to share their playbooks. How can we, to come to that question that I asked in the beginning of the evening, how can we become as coordinated, as organized as the autocrats we're facing?
Yeah, I think we have to first realize that they do cooperate with each other. It's not always in the public eye. A lot of things are hidden in the public eye. Yeah, today it's visible. Yeah. Sometimes they decide to show their power. So they had many meetings like that within their groups in the parliament. But a lot of times it's hidden. So that is one way. But I think we really need to focus on one thing which somehow disappeared from our vocabulary as Democrats, and that is really linking why democracy actually matters for us. Because yes, Orban rigs elections, Vučić and the Georgian Dream rigs elections, but they do not have 0% in their support. They have some support in their countries. Marine Le Pen got almost elected as a president of France. And then you have Nigel Farage and PVV, biggest party, and AfD polling at 20%. We have done something wrong. That we are dealing with this. Because, yeah, we mentioned in the 90s and in the 2000s, especially in our neighborhood, that really was an era of big optimism, because the promise was that democracy was not only going to be the end itself, but democracy is going to bring us a good life. There was a promise in 2000 when there was a revolution in Serbia, in 2003 when there was a revolution in Georgia, that if we follow this way, we're going to live well. And well-being, welfare in freedom. And that did not really deliver. And I think, and similar story could be also seen in the Western Europe, where there's a large parts of the society which advanced, but there's a large part of the society which really feels neglected, that they are not listened to, they are not taken into consideration, that they have lost some of their security and place in a society that they used to have. So I think we really need to bring this back in our thinking and in our discussions, and really to engage with people. Why do they first vote for this kind of parties? And really bring democracy with living well, living in welfare, because one of the reasons why we want to live in democracy is because we want to have a better control over the institutions, better institutions, no corruption, more transparency. Because in the end,
vote someone out.
Exactly. That's very important. Yeah. So this is one of the ways we have to cooperate on and really learn from each other how we can bridge and really strengthen our campaigns and our talk with people in the streets and those who are not in the streets and why they are not in the streets.
Yeah. And then what would maybe be a good start is the Serbian way, just finding enough people and go to every city in the country.
And abroad.
And abroad.
Yeah.
Yeah, to Brussels one day.
Yeah.
Cycling to Amsterdam, cycling to Brussels.
Yeah, with me as a Green Party member, I'm really happy that it's renewable ways of transportation. Yeah.
I haven't asked my last question to you guys yet, but I feel at this stage I want to move to what Orban calls the progressive left elite. The audience,
the hardline globalists.
Yeah, hardline globalists.
Here.
Because it is actually interesting to, at the stage where we're asking what can citizens' movements do to hear from some citizens. So are there any people who feel like making a point right now? I'm gonna... Now I have a microphone for you.
Yes. I'm an historian too, but I already finished my education in 1985. So before the fall of the German Wall. And my question is, how old are the young ones? Because now I'm 70 plus, and I always asked, how old are they, the younger? Young students.
So how young are they?
Yes. What is their age?
We want to know how young are the movements.
Okay.
How old are you, for example?
I am 30, yeah, exactly. I'm 30, and the protesters are 12 years younger than me in average. So 18 to 20 to 23 most.
Okay.
I saw a hand over here.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question is for Natalia. And it's about the enlargement of process of Serbia. The EU proposed a date for Serbia to enter the European Union, 2030, while at the same time Vučić is playing like a balancing policy between like committing to EU values in Brussels, while at the same time resisting to EU enlargement in Belgrade, in the parliament. Do you think that the protests happening now in your country will accelerate Serbia's enlargement process, or either weaken Serbia's position in the enlargement?
Do we collect questions, or I answer immediately?
I feel this one we can just answer immediately.
Yeah. I think that if the requests from the protests are fulfilled, that will actually quicken up the path of Serbia into the European Union. Because the demands of, when you look to, we need to separate actual demands, because actual demands are really specified, but you can cluster them into, I want a standard behavior from the institution when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to freedom of media, when it comes to courts. So in that terms, as I said previously, that is all that also Europe is asking from us. But what I think is happening is, for example, you have a tent project, so that is a part of our accession, that you want to ease up the borders and that you want to make green transportation and infrastructure, that each EU state has the same standards when it comes to highways, railways, and so on. So what the Vučić does, he takes the money from the EU, then gives that money to Chinese, so that he can bypass the procurement standards that EU is asking. So he's bypassing that so your money the money that your taxpayers' money, so he's giving it to Chinese investments. So we have a lot of Chinese investments in Serbia, for example. So I think if we fulfill these demands, then we will have a common ground to build up on that, and that common ground can actually accelerate the path of Serbia towards the EU.
Yeah, I really think it will help. It will also guide the EU towards the right direction, because until now, the EU was very hesitant, very weak in responding to Vučić. It didn't help that there was also a commission for enlargement who was the right hand of Orban. So he really wanted to appease Vučić, but this appeasement is the overall strategy of the EU, unfortunately. But now that the protesters themselves say, look, hey, rule of law is important to us, it's much more difficult for the EU to still, ignore that part. And we have a lot of funding mechanisms where actually rule of law conditionality should be imposed. And for a long time, it didn't really work. I mean, half of the IPA money for the Western Balkans goes to Serbia. You can imagine why. But I think really with this protest, it's much more easier to say, look, now practice what you preach. And also support civil societies, support the movements that are calling for these reforms.
There was a question over here, and then I saw some hands over there. A couple of hands over there, actually.
Thank you very much for your talks. There was a lot talk about democracy and its values. And what is interesting in this idea is that we have a lot of liberal democracies in Europe. And also in Hungary, it was a liberal democracy which gave us Orban. In Holland, we have a liberal democracy which gave us the PVV, Mr. Wilders. So it's autocratic politics. So it's coming out of liberal policies. So my question to you all is, what is the EU if it has values and democracy in a liberal context, which give us autocracy? And what's the future for countries as Georgia and Serbia if they have a liberal democracy, which delivers us autocracy?
Which we know what it delivers. A good question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course, the ballot box and democracy bears the risk of electing someone that is not quite democratic in his or her outlook. And that shows the importance of reaching out to citizens and to show them what is the importance of democracy, of democratic values, of a Europe that will protect you, not only by the military against Russia, but also protect you against food poisoning or a whole host of things, and show you the importance of democracy, show you the importance of Europe, and then hopefully they won't go to the ballot box and vote for somebody who is anti-Europe, anti-liberal, anti-democratic. But it takes a lot of messaging, a lot of canvassing to get people to get the message and don't vote for an autocratic person.
And where is the rule of law in this? Because I think a lot of people always talk about democratic erosion, but the rule of law can help democracies have elected leaders that actually stick to their own rules, to have people that play by their own rule.
That would be very
nice. We had a liberal party, for example, that didn't really play by its own rules for a while. And so many countries like us still have names on the election draft that are not even claiming to wanted to serve by the rule of law. How do we deal with that?
Well, I mean, not on liberal democracy. I think one of the key for it is separation of power and the institutions which the autocrats take on the first attacks, and these are very hard to defend as well. Like if looking at I know it's a bit exaggerated, but looking at the US now, what Trump administration is doing is going after institutions. It's slowly eroding the small things on which people are not gonna, and no one's gonna protest US side closure, right? This is such a small thing that people, they cannot be bothered. But this is how Orban actually also started, with very, very, very small steps. You poison the entire system, which is set up in a way for it to control and to contain power, and especially in those countries where also system allows for that one-party governance, like in Hungary, and there was no containment for that. It was inherent for that system, and similarly in Georgia and Serbia, we're also very used to our history. Our experience with democracy is actually one-party rule. It's very unusual to have a genuine coalition type of government with different parties coming together with different interests and negotiating and going through these deals, which also very often tires people out. But I think this is always has to be a reminder that the alternative to that is actually one-party system, which in the end might fix things quickly, but we know how they fix things, and I think the tragedy that happened in the Novi Sad is actually an example of how autocrats fix things and build things quickly, just through corruption, through some very shady deals, and this is not only about infrastructure, but also how they deal with institutions and with the state as such.
And don't ever believe that you're impervious. I mean, even here in the Netherlands, if you see the massive cuts in education, in university budgets, if you see the plans for curbing the public broadcasting service, if you remember correctly, the tax proposals in raising the tax tariff for newspapers and stuff, it's all those little things Georgia is talking about. People are trying it everywhere, not only in the US, but even in the Netherlands, and you really have to be careful and warn people about that.
But if I may, democracy is not only the majority has it all. I mean, this is how Orban likes to portray it. Like, well, I won the election, so what's wrong with it? First, he had screwed up the election system, and then he won, indeed. But a real democracy is, of course, respecting rule of law and fundamental rights. But I agree, once getting in power, you can try to demolish that. But then it's not a democracy anymore, I would say. And here, now, I think the Netherlands is really in a kind of test stage. Like, our institutions, is our rule of law resilient enough to protect its system against these kind of attacks? And not so long ago, I was in Republika Srpska, together with someone from the Czech Republic, and they were also the NGOs explaining what was happening there. And then those from Czech Republic said, it's all so familiar to me because this is right now also going on in our country. So again, the attacks. But we are a young democracy. So for us, it's more easy. But you in the Netherlands, you have old institutions. You have a stronger system. Maybe that counts for a certain period of time, that we have firewalls. But look at the US, how rapidly this whole playbook is being played off. So it is dangerous, but then we're not talking about a democracy, I would say.
Yeah,
I'm afraid
I wanted to add a little bit a different angle, because I share your concern in terms that many would say today, and I'm on that line, that democracy is used to legitimize different political systems, but we talk so much of democracy, and we have some understanding of the democracy. Each one of us has an understanding that we basically made the word democracy so full that it's actually empty of the content. So I think that the biggest question today is actually what we think about representative democracy. Do we have representation? Because you have, you maybe have actually a crisis of political parties more and political leaders more than you have the crisis of democracy, in my opinion. The other thing that I think is important when we talk about, I call the Georgia and Serbia elected authoritarian regimes, because they used democratic mechanisms to come into the power, and they captured the state by democratic mechanisms. So but because of that, I would make a difference what we want to legitimize, but what we want to exercise. So I'm a big advocate about direct democracy, and I'm really, really happy that in Serbia we have now the plenaries on the faculties that are showing us that if we don't exercise our sovereignty every day, somebody will exercise that for us, and usually that will be some authoritarian in our case.
Mm-hmm. I feel that the worries are still not satisfied.
Yeah, thank you for your comments on my question, but I questioned really specific. What's the problem of our liberal democracies, which deliver us Wilders, which deliver us Orban, and why should you, as countries like Georgia or Serbia, would say that our liberal democracy in Europe, which delivers us, for example, colonizing Africa, etc. And I want to ask specific to Ivo, because he was advisor of Minister President Rutte. Was this discussion on the table that liberal democracies delivers us autocracies? If you see in a liberal democracy as America, it delivers us Trump. So why are countries as Georgia and Serbia want us to have a liberal democracy? I can't understand this.
But sorry, I have a quick answer.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
I'm not sure that anybody asked the citizens of Serbia what kind of democracy they want to have.
Yeah.
As far as now, they want to have. I think that citizens of Serbia and Georgia as well want now to answer to the question, okay, can we have a minimal basis that we can count on, that we can have some rules that are followed, and then we can answer the question what kind of democracy we want, because we didn't answer that. And in that terms, it's not like the Serbia or Georgia are like, no, we want in Europe because those liberal democracies are great. One of the values of democracy is to critique, observe, and question the things. So we also want to participate in Europe, who is questioning how she should develop democracy in itself. So in that terms, I really, I will, what I think is the problem that I believe you're asking, but I'm sure that my answer is not good, but I will offer it again. Why the liberal democracies turn out in autocracies? I believe that representation is the problem, that you usually don't have citizens represented from the different areas of the state that you live in.
The politicians are the problem.
We are the problem, yeah.
No. I mean, not you guys. No. No, I mean, liberal democracy in itself is not the problem. If you look back at the year Orban got elected for prime minister for the second time around, it was 2010, and the previous government, which was a socialist government, didn't solve the problems of the people, and the people got angry about that, and he capitalized on that. Yeah. There were massive demonstrations in the streets of Budapest for Orban against the socialist government because they wanted someone to fix their problems. The politicians that were in power didn't listen to the problems of the people, and the same here in the Netherlands got Geert Wilders into power. Rutte, unfortunately, he didn't listen very good to his advisors. He didn't fix the problems of the people. So they elected Geert Wilders, and that's the main thing. Representation, indeed, is one of the problems. People feel unheard, but also don't see politicians fixing their problems. And then they go for the simple solution of, well, maybe someone in power and give him all the power to fix our problems.
I don't think there's an alternative, but we need to work very hard to keep it sound. And we need to find a strategy on populist politics, because these are the easy solutions for big problems. And we need to do it better.
Okay, I'm going to have 2 more questions from the audience, and maybe if you could ask them to a specific panel member, then we'll make it Yeah, is that scary? I'll try and see what I can do to help you.
Can I hold it?
I even hold the mic.
Oh my God, service. You're the best. First of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for traveling all this way. I feel like one of the important concepts that we're speaking about, but the term hasn't been mentioned yet, is this form of militant democracy. This concept of that we have to, to a certain degree, sacrifice our complete extent of democratic values in order to safeguard democracy itself. I think this is very much the point that you raise as well, that autocrats are often elected or make use of the democratic system to undermine it from the inside out. So many questions to ask, so little time. Like genuinely though, like from my perspective, I'm 22 years old, I'm studying politics, philosophy and economics in Utrecht, and everyone around me feels this incredible sense of frustration and to a certain degree hopelessness, because we do protest, we do go out in the streets, not as much as in Georgia and Serbia, but we do try, but there is no, like 9 times out of 10, the encampments or whatever topic it's on, they just get beaten up by riot cops and then it just gets shimmied off and then it'll be forgotten the next week. I feel like to a certain degree, what do we do? What can we do? We're not being listened to when we protest. The politicians have empty words, and we have to just trust that diplomacy is happening behind the scenes and that things are really happening, but we don't see anything of it. No one has any trust. Like, what do we do? What are the options as like the next generation of people who are going to have to try and fix this whole mess?
Clear.
Well, I mean, big question, but I would just remember one thing. Imagine it's 1987, you're somewhere in some Soviet Union city, Tbilisi, Vilnius, I don't know, Warsaw, and you go out on a demonstration against the Soviet Union. And of course you're told that, come on, like, why are you sacrificing your life? This country exists, it's been there for already almost 70 years. You're just wasting your life, you're wasting your youth. You have KGB knocking on your parents' doors saying that you take care of your child or you're going to be fired from work soon. So what's the point? And then in less than 3 years, the country just collapses. And all the republics which have been flooding the streets with very few numbers. In the beginning, it was very, very, very few people in the streets of Tbilisi, in the streets of Vilnius and Riga and many others. Very few people. Sometimes less than 100, those who went to the to gulags and to prisons, Soviet prisons. But they had the hope that that matters and that it is possible. And this is the biggest thing right now that autocrats really want us to believe, that we are powerless, that we cannot really do anything. And of course, when you look, I mean, Georgia, more than 160 days, we are in the streets and nothing changed. In a way, we have the same government. They have not changed their course. We have over 50 people in the prison. We have millions of fines altogether. What is the point? But it is the point, because they will never show, autocrats never show that they are crumbling. They only crumble in the last seconds. Remember Assad's regime in Syria? He told to almost no one when he ran away that morning. The night before, they were very sure that he's forever. The morning, 6 a.m., he was in Moscow. So everything is possible.
They're all in Moscow.
Nice.
Service on the house.
At 75, I would say it's not only doom and gloom in Europe. What we have achieved in these 75 years is that we built a new model of democracy, which can be called a democratic union of democratic states. That's why the new members like Georgia and Serbia want to join that community of values. And what we now have to learn is that we have to defend our democratic union of democratic states against the likes like Orban, who want to turn it into an illiberal, into an undemocratic organization of illiberal states. So I would call on the European Parliament, who is here, bring yourself together and make, but the polity as such is in danger. It's betrayal to go to Russia on the day in times of war, to go there. So we should be stronger in defending the values for for which our previous generations have been fighting, and for which I hope you will be fighting too.
Clear. Oh, that wasn't so much of a question, but it was a very clear statement, and I think
Thanks for that.
we all did hear that, and I think the night needed that last little push. Although there is one more push that the night needs, and so before I'll choose my final words for this evening, I luckily have someone else to do that for me, and that is Atta de Tolk, a storyteller, a word artist, a writer, someone who I know as a rapper from 101 Bars. He's here. He was the mysterious writer on the floor of the evening, and so the floor is entirely his. And we'll listen to him. Give him a warm hand of applause.
Hallo allemaal. Hello everybody. Hello everybody. Thank you very much. My name is indeed Atta de Tolk, and I had a lot of stress this evening because I wrote this text that I want to share with you all, if you allow me. Do you? Okay. We are here tonight to learn from the front lines of democracy, to learn from pioneers that stand up whenever they see hypocrisy, even when it means they will experience animosity. More than anything, it will fuel them probably. It's only natural for people to stand up for their rights. So whenever they get clear insights of bad things, they will ignite and will be ready to fight. So it's natural, however, not always so logical, because the challenges they face from it are diabolical. If you are surrounded by pressuring powers, you will come across a lot of obstacles. And you will need support from like-minded people, otherwise the fight will seem impossible. Questions rise like, how can we ever be safe if corruption is found in every small corner of the state? The public interaction is demotivated if people on all levels know that corruption in Serbia, for example, is the status quo. How will you get the masses to invest in change if the old ways are what they are already expecting? The answer is the new generations, armed with hope and not afraid to confront in communication. They see the state of the state and demand an explanation, keep their eyes wide open and tongues weaponed with words, standing up for their rights to get what they deserve. The winds of change are here to rearrange. A very nice message to spread on Europe Day. Some people hunt to have the power forever. They trick in populistic mixes and consider themselves very clever. But the power is, in the end, in the hands of the people, which they forget to remember. So therefore, their days are counted already like an old calendar. Resistance is growing. Cracks in the system are showing. Hundreds of thousands of citizens are saying, stop acting so innocent. And that collective fight is making the difference. They refuse to be victims and witnesses. And for the people in Western Europe, it's a very important test. Are we ready to back them up, or are they left with their own stress? Because if these courageous people will not be backed up, the trust in each other will definitely crack up. We cannot allow that, especially when their mind matches us and ours. We have to unite the powers. Don't let it become sour. Their fight needs to be fostered. This already crossed borders, so don't bother to try to leave it in the hands of others. If you pay attention, the lessons from the past already taught us otherwise. So when you see them, it's like looking in your sister's, brother's, or mother's eyes. And for that, it's not a bad idea to be ready to collide with the other side. We will not advocate violence, but surely don't co-sign the silence. The EU civil society cannot afford to be cowards because of their own anxiety. Either you're an asset or a liability. That's what this challenge really means in reality. We've been hearing so much about being united for so long, so are we doing it finally? Are we helping, caring, or staring while the clock is ticking, blood is dripping, and human rights are missing? Do we really understand what we are risking? It can be the end of our values, something worth fighting for, with our heart, head, and mind, but in no way something to ignore. So let's explore how we can support more. We will always open a window when they close a door. Never forget the word power is still in the word powerless. The union we talk about falls or stands with representation. So let's exercise our strength in this tense situation. Thank you.
Bravo, after the talk. And this brings us to the end of the night. Although I'm safe in saying that a true Balie evening doesn't end here. It ends 50, 60 yards that way, where you can find the bar, where you can agree or disagree about anything anyone has said. We will stick around. And I think on this day of Europe Day, we started with that Janus face, Europe Day and Victory Day on the same one. Is Europe credible is one of the questions that was under this evening. And I think listening to you all, well, not if we're tolerating intolerance, definitely not if we're selective about rights and selective about what we accept and what we don't, and definitely not if we're silent. And that is something that Atta also preached. So every time they close the door, we will open a window. For now, I really want to thank everyone who was here, Tineke, Georgie, Ivo, and Natalia. Natalia, Ivo. Thank you so much for coming all the way and telling your stories. Thank you so much for the IFG for organizing this together with us. Thank you, Yul and Loen. Specifically, thank the technicians who were up there and were actually at some point shaking the very democracy behind us. I can see the screen. Say hi to my colleagues at the bar and have a very good weekend. And see you all soon.